And now for the news.
Over to you, Hovda.
We have the weather today.
Hey everybody, welcome to Night School Out of Character. This is our 6th episode. Woo! Without pointing, let's introduce all of everybody who's here. I'm Elizabeth Vick. I'm one of your players.
I'm Kat Flores.
This is stare off. I'm like, I'm not going next. I'm Michael Vasquez. I am the GM.
Joshua Hovda.
That's it. That's all of us.
And that's all of us.
That's all of us. That's all of us who are here right now.
Were we expecting someone else?
No, we were not.
We were not. That's all who
I
was
thought Matthew
invited.
McConaughey was going to Zoom bomb us.
I have a story about that for later. So our episode today, I am really interested, being a little bit more of a newbie, so I may not have as much to say about this topic. Things that you think make a good story. So just in your opinion, things you like, if it's a player situation, characters, the setting, how the GM is.
Watch yourself.
Be very...
Only the positives. Only the compliments.
But really, only the positives.
No.
We've already done bad stuff or negatives. We're sticking to the I'm hosting. We're sticking to the positives. I'm not.
This is the Mr. Rogers episode of Out of Character.
Won't you be my GM?
My player.
Oh, I love that. No, but I think there are so many things that go into a really good story, but I feel like if we were to really just kind of pare it down, I think for me, one of the biggest things that goes into it is continuity. Like, it has to make sense, and it just like when you're watching a TV show, like, you don't want there to be loopholes or like, I don't know, weird gaps in information or really obvious errors in history. Keeping everything consistent is such a big deal in telling a good story.
It's also incredibly hard to do. Because there's so many times where...
As long as amulets don't turn to lockets, we're good.
Can you say that again, Hovda?
Yeah.
Say it again.
As long as amulets aren't turned into lockets, we're in good shape.
Okay, so I'm going to clarify this because they have no idea what you're talking about. So in one of the campaigns that are in, we said positive things about the team.
We did.
No, so, and this is what it actually is what I was talking about with Kat. It's very hard to stay with that much continuity with the amount of information that you're putting out for the players, especially if you're doing a campaign that takes years to complete. A lot of people feel comfortable with doing something that just pushes straight through and it'll be maybe 10 sessions and you're done with the story and there's no real expansion of do what you want. It's that linear storytelling, and they have everything to them. Like, this is exactly what you're going to say, and if you get stuck, you can look at an appendix and say, oh, here's the historical background, or here's the description of the item. We don't play that way. I personally enjoy those open worlds, so I have to make copious notes, and so I actually will show you no information in the notes because you aren't seeing crap on that. But it's like
I wanted the spoilers.
Whoa. But no, so it's like I have a sketchbook of NPCs. I have a 3-section book that has all items, shops, special missions.
Barely open it.
Oh, because I wasn't going to show anything. And then the amount
that goodness getting out.
The amount of small notebooks that I have that just have sketched out maps, hidden details, things that because y'all will show up randomly and talk to somebody that was supposed to be just a shadow, and it becomes a new character, and I'm sketching notes on, oh, what did they look like? What did they sound like? Recently in this quarantine kind of shelter at home time, I've been going back to our old episodes knowing that we're about to start re-recording.
Yay!
And I actually thought, I wonder if I missed something, and I did. So I actually had to make a new binder that's just NPCs and descriptions I gave of them, where they work, there's so many details that you can get lost. And the one that Hovda's talking about is I had given them an item that was very crucial into the storyline, and over a long period of time, because I never used it, it had changed what it was from an amulet to a locket, and they couldn't figure out how to activate it, and it just so happened that I had intended it to be something that they close, like a locket, to activate it, and it caused a big commotion where they almost died. So I'm sorry.
So what I meant when I said continuity, it was less of the minute details. I will say I don't think the amulet to the locket was a minute detail, but in terms of the story, I'm meaning more like the cities that make such a big impact, the royal families that make a big impact, that some NPCs that just keep showing up and they always have the same kind of banter, the same kind of dialogue, and you know what to expect when you approach a certain character. I think that is what's really important. I think that's what I meant a little bit more when I said continuity.
Absolutely.
Well,
and from a player standpoint, go ahead, Vic.
Well, no, I was just gonna say I'm spoiled because I think the most I've gotten to play has been when Michael's the GM, and it's like a finely woven spider web in terms of everything. Also, spider webs on the brain.
Stop.
My great grandma had a teacup, because that's what we were doing yesterday. A white teacup with gold spider webs all over it.
That's
I'm into
classy.
it.
Yeah, save it.
But really, like, everything connects to something else, and you've talked about this a little bit before, is you planned in such detail and so well that months down the line something may come up that we thought very little of or didn't think was a big deal, and it's like, surprise. But it always makes sense. Like, I think tying it in with continuity, it always makes sense, and there's no, it's like you said, a good TV show.
Yeah, and I think going into that, like kind of going into the next thing that makes a good story is the continuity, yes, but the continuity of characters, and having that, like those characters really have a backstory and develop. And then, for example, like having a certain NPC that you really didn't think was that important get more and more important, and eventually possibly becoming the big baddie of an entire campaign. Just little things like that. And it doesn't have to be that grandiose or anything, but just the ability for a character to have its own life in a story. And I think that's really important. And not just the player characters. It's all of the NPCs and everything too.
When I was gonna say earlier, like I think from a player standpoint, like it's really important for you to know who your character is and play your character consistently, because it's a matter of, this NPC, yeah, if you come across him once, it's not really a big deal, but if you come across him 2, 3, 4 times, and your GM's trying to play them straight, but you're playing yourself differently, it's like it doesn't help the story. And that's one of the things I know for myself. I take way more notes than I probably should on certain things, but it's for like if stuff like that comes back around, where it's just like, okay, this name sounds familiar. I know I wrote something about them. What was it? It could just be this tiniest thing that just like, okay, I remember how I felt about this character now, and I can interact with them more efficiently and yeah, accordingly.
This is kind of a side topic, but the fact that you brought up note-taking, I love watching any player, and seeing if they're note-takers or not. I am a note-taker, but mine is like chicken scratch, one word things, and then arrows are drawn everywhere. And when I go back and look at them, they make no sense.
It's not that helpful.
But I'll audibly hear somebody say something and it'll trigger a memory because that's just how my memory works. And I'll go, oh, I know exactly what happened and I remember the past sessions. But Hovda, if you go back and watch any of our sessions, you'll notice, that his head goes down half the time because the moment something is said and it's like, there's 3 rocks that you kicked over, 3 rocks kicked over. Like he is so self-focused. But then you'll call me out on things and it'll be like a couple of sessions later, I'll say something and you're like, no, remember that was a gold bead, not a blue bead. And I'm like, how do you even know that? But I don't know. No, go ahead.
It's one of those things as a player, it's like, you know, when your GM's like, you walk into a room and that's it. There's a
Oh,
Is he
we
gonna
might have
speed
lost
up?
him.
Anticipation. Well, sooner or later he'll come back and join us.
Yeah, but I think you're exactly right. That level of buy-in to the story where you want to keep up, you want to remember those details, and everybody keeping each other accountable is so important. And it's good because it really does allow you to build the story together, which is what the whole game is.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm thinking just by the few words that I heard Hovda say about the descriptions of when you enter a place, I feel like that's the key component from a GM standpoint. If you're telling a story, you really have to get comfortable with describing intimately what's happening, because it's really hard and frustrating for players to enter an area, enter a new town, a region, and they have no concept of what's around them, and you're trying to get them to think outside the box and have options, but you're not providing that landscape for them. So there's a lot of times I will try to give details of the furniture in the room, the smells, the temperature, because I want them to get an understanding of what this area of the world is like. And then it leads them to start asking more poignant questions in their investigations to get more information, where I'm not giving them the details of what you need in this spot.
Mm-hmm.
Something we talked about in one of our previous episodes of those things that kind of just break our rules is I don't want to go into a room and say there is a chair, there is a lever and a window, when you know there's other things in there.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're automatically going, okay, what's important about the chair, the lever, and the window? And it doesn't feel like a real story.
Yeah.
Whereas I can give you that you walk into a study, and just by saying that you walk into a study or an office, it gives that idea of there's probably a desk, or there's probably, yes, you have to let them make those connections on their own. And then when they ask, those are the times you can ask a question is, do I see a desk anywhere? Mm-hmm. Absolutely, you do. I don't want to guide you straight to things.
Yeah.
That makes me think of an escape room. Like you get to go into the escape room and you have to figure out what's important and like what's a clue, as opposed to someone's hand feeding you what it is.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. I love that connection, because when you go to an escape, and granted, I've only been to one escape room.
Really?
Yeah, but like when I went to this particular one, you get like a very generic backstory, and then you go in and you're slowly gathering more information that creates an entire story, which is exactly how, Michael, how I feel like you set up the stories, because we have the background, but it's up to us to explore different parts of the world and figure out who is important and who is not important and things like that. So I feel like,
which leads us to sometimes, I guess, pulling along a character that's really not important.
But it's okay. The thing is, y'all make them important. And that's the joyous part of it, is there's people that I didn't intend to have story plot. And because y'all drive them forward, that's how the world works. We don't go in the world and have it set that these are the only people we're allowed to interact with. Thankfully, in our society, we don't have that.
Mm-hmm.
But we can grab somebody and say, hey, come along with us. I mean, evidence right here. Vic, we dragged you into this project and said, hey, why don't you come with us? And it's been wonderful, but it's opened up a whole new outlook of how we play this game, having you.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever I the most important part for me for stories, the continuity is there, but really it's that character again. If that's oh, Hovda.
I'm glad everyone can see this.
Yes.
Me too.
Oh my gosh. So it's that idea of Hovda, you crack me up, by the way.
What they do? I just got here.
One death saving
That's
throw.
all it takes. You just got here.
But no, if you have a character, and I alluded to this last time, if they have a background and you've set like, I'm just going to make one off the spot. I have a character and he is an Aarakocra. He's a bird-infused humanoid. And he has been caged his whole life and feels like this hatred towards slavery. So that if you keep thinking that you're going to spend the whole time driving, I'm freeing slaves, I don't like slavery, I don't like people who are slave owners, I don't like people who have birds, and if that's the only thing that you're allowing your character to do, if you stay in the back until you hit one of those hit moments and then you start acting, it doesn't feel right. And I feel like that's the struggle, is a lot of players and a lot of GMs don't understand that we are more than an issue.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that makes the character very two-dimensional instead of multi-dimensional.
So it's like currently
an onion.
Currently,
Yes.
I'm playing a noble character, and I really don't like playing nobles because they come off cocky most of the times, and I don't like playing that. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to play a noble and see how this goes. And it just so happened that it went from, I had a really dark history. I was neutral evil, which I was excited to play. And then now we're 6 or 7 sessions in, and my character has somehow become this stronger leader who just gave a Braveheart speech to a town that's been demolished about how he's going to help them rebuild. My alignment is shifting, and it's not what I intended, but because of all of the people I've met along the way and the way I connected to them, it's okay to change who you are. And I feel like that's what makes a really good story, is when you see people change.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really good kind of segue into like the next is like connection, the conversations that you have with other characters, whether they be the other players at like at the table or NPCs. Having those conversations that kind of spark and build relationships in the story is so important. And I feel like that's another one of the big things about building a story. And it's so important because if you think about it, if you have such a cool character with an amazing background that never gets to interact with anybody, it's useless.
Yeah. You have to make that connection with somebody.
I'm curious, have y'all ever considered or played a character who actually has a romantic relationship with a PC or another character?
I haven't.
I feel like Ragnar tried unsuccessfully.
Because that's a level, that intimacy level, I've noticed I've tried it multiple times, and it's just as frustrating as it is in real life. Of you make the subtle advances, not in your case, Hovda, you just went straight in and it didn't work. Hint, hint. But
I was playing my character.
Were you though?
Oh, we love you, Hovda.
Wait, are you guys?
Ladies,
Is this a secret intervention?
Ladies, he's available. But it really is. It's the idea of like I want to invest moments that are romantic, but not in front of other people, because I know that's personally how I would run a relationship. So there's sometimes I'll be in a party and I want to break away and have moments where I can connect. And it's really hard to do when you're navigating the storylines of other people who want to be on the stage and they try to interject into your scenes. And it's really tough to make it believable. So a lot of times people don't catch those little small nuances of, I think they're hitting on my character, or maybe my character has feelings for them. But I passionately love it. So I'm still waiting.
Like, is it not easier for you on Roll20 since you can do like private chats and stuff like that? Or are you not trying that currently?
Whisper.
Yeah, well, you got to remember that we talked about the whisper function and how it is really nice. However, it also denies the DM the understanding of what's going on. So I personally, whenever I play in one of those formats, Discord, Roll20, we played one on Facebook Messenger, which was real fun and interesting. But anytime I do that, I try not to use the whisper or the private chat unless it really is something small that wouldn't change the story.
That makes sense. And kind of going back to what you were saying about the romantic connections, I know that having those kinds of intimate conversations, it's difficult for me, like just in real life. So it's even more difficult for me to kind of put that into my characters, because I feel like there's an added layer of reluctancy, or I don't even know how to explain that. Because
Well, it's because you're on stage. Like Michael said, your character is on stage, and I think if you take that moment, even if it's for your character and with another character, it's their scene.
That's true.
So
I guess
y'all are, even if it's a side scene, you're still front and center.
that's true. Even kind of taking out all of like this, like filming and everything, even being in front of a whole bunch of people, having that kind of intimate moment, I guess there's an added layer of vulnerability. It feels like it almost doesn't belong to me. That, I don't know. It's more difficult for me to engage in. So
Have you ever caught yourself feeling like you can't make a choice for your character because you're not your character?
yes,
I've been there a couple times.
absolutely. Well, and I feel like I don't even know if that's because, I don't know. Yeah, it's almost like, I don't know, this isn't my story to tell.
Yep. When in fact, it is your
It
story
is.
to tell.
It is.
But that's a good sign, because usually those are the moments when you realize you've made your character so believable, at least for yourself, that you do start realizing that you want them to have free will in a weird way. And when it gets to those really intimate, difficult decisions, usually players will hesitate because they realize, like, this has implications on my character's life, even though it really doesn't hurt them in the long run. They will hesitate.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of beautiful, actually. Well, for me, it is.
No, I agree. I think it is. I think it is very beautiful, especially to see a relationship grow from nothing, even if it is fictional. Because when you're writing a story or even watching a TV show, I keep going back to that because I feel like, for the most part, not for the most part, but storytelling in general, it all kind of, it doesn't follow the same formula, but it should make you feel a certain way. And when we're telling a story, it should be very similar to reading a book or watching a TV show. You invest so much into those characters and you want the story to end well for them, or at least be a good story, even if it doesn't end well for them, even if it breaks your heart in some way, you want it to be good. And I don't know if building those relationships, or I think building those relationships makes the story good, but you connect so much with those characters. It is almost like in the last episode, Michael, you said that you will read a book and you're so angry that you throw the book across the room. It's almost one of those feelings, like you almost don't want to feel so much for these characters because you don't want that moment. That's what makes a good story.
So,
and then you go pick the book up again.
Yeah, always. So I'm actually going to relate this to, in my field as a music educator, one of the broader philosophies that we kind of study is a notion of time, space, and energy, which actually runs into movement, dance, and it falls into theater as well. And it's the idea that you have control of those three components in all of your actions. And as a musician, whenever we have those three components covered, that expression comes out when we can really master and manipulate how we want other people to perceive things. It goes into storytelling for me. The energy level is that how do you interact? Do you always, the players who hold back and never interject or never come forward and take spotlight to do something are forgettable. That space idea of, if you are not actually using the area around you and interacting with the mental physical space, then it's not a believable story as well. me. There's a difference between me as a character having a conversation to the group, me as a character saying I'm going to walk over to the bar and pull somebody over so I can have an intimate conversation. Me going and saying I want to go up to my room so that I can have a private monologue to myself. And you really think that's odd for it to be like, well, why do you need to pull a monologue? It's not a play. But with that monologue, I can develop my character where the people at the table can hear what I'm investing in, and it intensifies the passion of the story. And then the last one is is the time concept. So space, energy, and then time is how consistent, how long can you make that last? If you are only doing it today because you're in a good mood, and the next session you come in and you've turned it off, there's no consistency. As a players in that table, the story doesn't feel right. But if you can come in every single scene and mentally tell yourself, I'm going to make at least one thing happen in this scene, even if it's small, I'm going to make sure everybody knows. And it could be small things. I've seen people who have said in a scene, someone's talking, having an intimate conversation, and they'll say, I go over to the chair catty corner to your table, and I prop my legs up on the table and I lean back. They didn't say they're listening. They didn't say that they were eavesdropping or stealing, but they're letting you know someone's close by, which would change how you talk about anybody around you. They're letting you know that there's somebody in your presence. It's that give and take that I think people miss out on, because they feel like one person is allowed to do something at a time instead of everybody can be doing stuff.
And I think you pull us out of that a lot, Michael, because even if someone is kind of front and center of the story at a particular moment, you will make the time to say, okay, Kelnis, what are you doing? Q, what are you doing? Even if we're just going to sleep. And it really is, you give us that last moment to say, what are you thinking about? What are you going to do the last second before you fall asleep? And I think that's very powerful.
Well, and it's also a little bit like of a teaching moment in terms of like not knowing like, oh, I could be saying this while this is happening. I can say my character is doing this.
Yeah. Well, and I think that might bring us to there are so many things that make a good story, but I think one of the last ones that we should talk about today is a conclusion. A story is not a story without an end. And waking up from a dream doesn't count.
Oh,
unless it's a never-ending story.
No, GMs out there, I'm telling you right now, do not ever pull the dream sequence at any point in your story. If you really want to ruin something, tell them, oh, it was all a dream and all the work you did was nothing, because that will pull people out of that real quickly.
And it still stings 2 years later.
Way down the road. I didn't do it. Note to self, I did not do that.
No, it was not Michael. No, and I think having a good ending to the story, because you can have the most adventurous, heroic story, but if there's no ending to it, there's no kind of conclusion. Even if you do make it to the end of the story and you beat the big villain, that can't be the end. Like, there has to be some kind of, okay, this has been like a life-altering event. What are you doing? And in our last campaign, I do really want to spotlight the way that you, like, maybe not in detail, but the way that you closed out all of our stories, Michael. You told us 2 weeks in advance, hey, we're getting to the end. If you don't die, have something ready to say how your character is going to live out the rest of their life. And just having that notion and knowing my character might die. This may not ever happen, but having to think about those things really, first of all, it made me really not want my character to die because I wanted that ending so badly. But then kind of you hearing everybody's ending to their stories and intertwining them and making them one ending was so beautiful, and I'm still getting emotional about it.
Well, the really beautiful part about it for me is I do give my characters or my players advance notice anytime we're coming to a story arc. Even within the campaign themselves, when I realize we're about to reach an endpoint, I want you to have an idea of what's going to happen next, even though we won't be playing it. because the life doesn't end just because one thing finished. We don't finish a task and say, I'm done, and then die. It still goes on, and we're not going to get to play every second of these characters' lives. So I wanted y'all to give what's happening next, where are they going, what are their intentions. But even within a story arc, I feel like it's really, really important to have time in between before another catastrophic event or another dire circumstance happens, where y'all get some time to decompress. And how do you build your life? What do you do? And sometimes it's over a couple of days. Sometimes it's a month or two. It might even be, you have the next 3 years. What have you done to build your life in that time? Because realistically, when you look at the mechanics of the leveling system, whether you're leveling by experience and the amount of enemies you're taking out, the amount of skills and tasks you accomplish, or if you're doing milestones where it's like, when you reach this point in the story, you will become this. It makes no sense for me to have no skill one day, and then in the next morning, I masterfully know how to do something. There has to be an understanding of how you build those fundamental. So you either have to have a mentor, you have to have a deity, or you have to have some driving force of, I figured this out through study, through research. And I try to give y'all those throughout your story way early on, so that when we get to that point, you could say, I will spend time with so-and-so at the monastery working on monk skills. It makes believability of, when we come back, that's why you're a level 8 now versus the level 3 that you were. I want it to be understandable that if you're a real person, you don't just magically become this godlike person.
Yeah. I don't know, Vic, what do you think? Because even though you haven't played in a lot of stories, I know you're you read a lot of fantasy books, and not even fantasy books, just stories. So I don't know, what do you think makes a good ending, makes a good story ending?
I love what you talked about, closure. Like, I think having that, and having heard about y'all's past campaign, like just different parts and pieces of it, and how it was closed out, the fact that, maybe not everybody had a happy ending, but endings made sense for those characters. It was well thought out. And I feel like everybody probably had closure. Like, Michael gave them that chance to either think through what they were going to be doing in the future, or like the leaving a legacy, what part of them went on in some of the other characters' driving forces, or how they held them close to their heart. But I think that closure is such a big thing, because you can have a fantastic story that doesn't have the happy ending, but it's so good because of how it was ended. And like, maybe that's the end, but there is that little like inkling of something's going forward. Like, there's still a future, there's still hope, or there's still whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And there is hope. There's hope for us. There's hope for our channel, because if you subscribe right now by pushing below and hitting that subscribe button, we will be able to connect with you and keep our stories going. So make sure you subscribe to us, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, our Facebook page, and connect with us. Ask us what kind of content, or tell us what kind of content you want us to provide, because as you probably have guessed or witnessed, we love telling immersive stories. And as much as we love just playing and rolling the dice, we want to give you some believable characters that you will come to love as much as we do. So follow us, stay tuned, watch some episodes that you missed, and we will see you next time on Out of Character, or live for our next episode of...
Well, pre-recorded live.
For Isle.
Pre-recorded live.
We're going to do the thing with that. Either way, we miss you, and we'll see you there.